Summer, 1943. The sea looked calm enough to forgive, but beneath its skin, it kept a memory of everything it had taken. A convoy moved across the Atlantic like a row of ants dragging the weight of a world at war. Merchant ships packed with grain, munitions, and hope, escorted by destroyers whose engines throbbed like tired hearts. Somewhere below, German U-boats listened. Somewhere above, the Royal Navy prayed their noise didn't give them away. Commander Arthur Penrose stood in the cramped, sweating confines of a dockyard workshop in Portsmouth, staring at a metal box no bigger than a suitcase. Its wires coiled out like veins, pulsing with faint blue light. He had built machines all his life, radios, depth-charge triggers, even a toaster that once blew out half the barracks. But this one was different. This one hummed with something alive. "They'll never approve it," said Lieutenant Eleanor Grant, her voice sharp, Scottish, and too young to sound this tired. She leaned over the table, hair tied back with a pencil, cigarette dangling between two grease-stained fingers. "It breaks every rule they've written about counter-sonar interference." Penrose smiled without looking up. "That's because the rules were written by men who've never drowned." She sighed. "And you think this little box will stop torpedoes?" He finally looked at her. "No, I think it'll make the ocean believe the ship is somewhere else." The idea was absurd. A deception device that emitted false propeller sounds, creating phantom echoes on German sonar screens. Theoretically, a U-boat would lock onto the illusion and fire into empty water. Practically, it violated at least 6 Royal Navy safety directives and could, in the wrong frequency range, attract torpedoes instead of deflecting them. But Penrose had seen too many ships go down. Too many telegrams sent home with words like missing and presumed lost. His brother's name was on one of them. So he built the Ghost, illegal, untested, and maybe the only thing standing between a convoy and a watery grave. Outside, the wind carried the low boom of ship engines leaving harbor. War had become a rhythm everyone learned to live by. The cough of diesel, the echo of boots, the distant sirens. Ellie Grant wiped her hands on her trousers and adjusted her spectacles. "You know they'll have your head if this fails. Then I'll make sure it doesn't." She laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "You always say that before something catches fire." Penrose opened the workshop door, letting a gust of sea air thick with coal smoke and brine. Across the dock, men loaded crates under floodlights, their shadows stretching across the water like dark ghosts of themselves. "When I was a boy," he said quietly, "I thought the sea was infinite. I thought nothing could hide in it. Now I know it's just another battlefield with better camouflage." Ellie didn't answer. She knew what haunted him. His brother's destroyer sunk 2 years ago in the mid-Atlantic. They found nothing but oil slicks and a torn lifeboat. Every hum of sonar since had sounded to Penrose like an unfinished sentence. Later that night, when the tide was high and the dock fell silent, Penrose worked alone. He adjusted dials, measured wave harmonics, listened to the hum of electricity merging with the low murmur of the sea beyond the wall. It was like tuning into the ocean's heartbeat. His invention was dangerous, yes, but war had already made danger a daily habit. At dawn, Admiral Lockwood arrived, Penrose's old mentor, now gray, formal, and wearing his disapproval like a medal. "Arthur," he said, stepping carefully over cables, "you've been warned twice already. The board considers your project unsanctioned." Penrose didn't look up. Unsanctioned inventions end wars faster than sanctioned failures. Lockwood sighed. "You're chasing ghosts. That's the point." Ellie entered quietly with a clipboard. "Sir, if we could just test it. One run on a practice vessel." "No," Lockwood snapped. "If this thing jams our sonar systems, you could lose an entire crew. The Navy doesn't have ships to spare for superstition." Penrose turned, face lined with exhaustion but steady. "Superstition." He tapped the device, which gave a faint metallic ring. "This isn't magic. It's math, sound, and desperation. Everything else we've tried has failed." Lockwood's expression softened, almost regretful. "You're not wrong, Arthur. But desperation is a poor substitute for approval." He left without saluting. Hours later, a seaman slipped through the workshop door. a young technician from the HMS Vigilant. He carried a message stamped confidential. It wasn't from Lockwood. It was from the destroyer's captain. A single line scrawled in pencil. "We sail at dusk. Bring the box." Ellie looked at Penrose, eyes wide. "You can't. They'll court-martial you." Penrose buttoned his jacket, slipped the device into a canvas bag. "Let them. If it saves one ship, it's worth the trial." They boarded the Vigilant at sundown. The sea glowed copper beneath the setting sun, calm and deceitful. Sailors glanced curiously at the civilians lugging equipment, but said nothing. War taught everyone to mind their own secrets. Below deck, in the humming engine room, Penrose secured the device near the stern output. It was hot and cramped, the air heavy with oil and steam. "When I give the signal," he told Ellie, "flip the switch. We'll know within seconds if it works." "And if it doesn't?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Then history will be quieter without us." By midnight, the convoy was deep in open water. The sky had turned black, scattered with indifferent stars. The sea was unnervingly still. Then came the sound, the low, mournful ping of sonar. A U-boat was near. "Signal bearing 025, the navigator called. "Closing fast." Ellie's hand shook. "Now." Penrose nodded. "Now." She threw the switch. The device hissed to life, a strange metallic heartbeat pulsing through the hull. Every dial flickered. On the sonar screen, a second echo appeared. Another ship, half a mile away, moving in perfect sync. The captain squinted. "That can't be right." Below, Penrose watched as the machine stabilized, the frequency holding steady. For a moment, it felt as though the ship itself had split in two, its twin, invisible, sailing beside it. Then came the explosion, distant, muffled, but unmistakable. The U-boat had fired. The torpedo missed. It had chased the phantom sound into empty ocean. The crew cheered, but Penrose stayed silent. He knew it wasn't luck. It was deception made holy. Ellie exhaled, trembling. It worked. He looked out the porthole, where the black water glimmered faintly in the moonlight. "No," he said softly. It lied, and the ocean believed. Above deck, the stars burned colder, the waves whispering against steel. The ship pressed onward, its engines singing to a sea that no longer knew truth from illusion. Far below, in the dark miles beneath, another sound stirred, a second echo, faint but growing. Somewhere out there, another submarine had heard the lie, and this time it was listening back. The ocean was calm the night Vigilant entered the kill zone. The convoy spread across the dark water like a chain of drifting embers, each ship glowing faintly beneath blackout curtains, engines throbbing beneath the waves. The air tasted of salt and oil and the ache of men who had not slept in days. To the west, a half-moon hung low, turning the surface into sheets of silver glass. Somewhere below, predators listened. Commander Arthur Penrose stood on the bridge, his coat unbuttoned, collar whipping in the wind. The hum of his machine, a low, living pulse, seeped faintly from the deck below. They had tested it once on calm, coastal waters. Now it would face the cold indifference of the Atlantic. He turned the brass scope toward the horizon and saw nothing but the trembling white of distant waves. He almost preferred gunfire. At least bullets announced themselves. Torpedoes did not. Ellie Grant appeared beside him, clutching her headset, her expression pale but focused. "Hydrophones are picking up contact, bearing 017, range about 2 miles. Penrose nodded. "That'll be Kruger's hunting ground." She tried to steady her breath. "Do you think it'll work again?" He smiled without looking at her. "I think the sea remembers lies longer than truths." Below deck, sailors whispered about the ghost box, though none knew what it did. All they knew was that 2 officers had come aboard with strange equipment, and the captain had allowed it without orders from command. Rumor traveled faster than sound in war. Faith, even faster. Some prayed to the machine, others cursed it under their breath. By 0200 hours, the convoy radioed a warning. Another merchant ship had vanished an hour earlier, torn open by a torpedo somewhere to the north. On the sonar screen, a single flicker appeared, an approaching shape faint but steady. "Contact confirmed," said the sonar operator. "Range closing." The captain's jaw tightened. "Mr. Penrose, if your trick doesn't work, I'll have your hide before the sea does." Penrose only nodded. "Let's hope she believes us." Ellie moved to the control panel. The machine rested inside a steel casing, wires snaking toward the hull, tiny lights blinking in rhythm. She touched the main switch, feeling the heat through her gloves. Powering in 3, 2... A low vibration rippled through the ship, subtle but unmistakable. The sound blended with the ship's own hum until it became impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. On the sonar, a second echo appeared, an exact twin of Vigilant, moving half a mile starboard. "Bloody hell," murmured the sonar man. "We've doubled ourselves." No one breathed. Minutes passed. The blip of the enemy sub hesitated, then turned toward the phantom echo. The torpedo came, slicing the water unseen. Then nothing. A distant thud, muffled far away. The sonar cleared. Cheers broke from the bridge, ragged, relieved, half hysterical. The captain clapped Penrose on the shoulder. "You've done it, man. You've fooled the devil himself." But Ellie didn't cheer. Her eyes were fixed on the machine. The lights were flickering too fast. "It's overheating," she said. "The current's unstable." Penrose leaned over the panel. The gauges danced erratically, the smell of burning insulation creeping up through the vents. "She's drawing too much power." "Shut it down." He hesitated. "No. If we stop now, they'll hear us." A shout from above. "Second contact." Another sub closing. The captain barked orders. Sailors rushed across the deck, boots clanging like rain on tin. Ellie grabbed a wrench, tightening the loose connector as the device shuddered. Sparks flew. "Arthur, I've got it," he said, pressing his sleeve over the cable, holding it steady. "Keep the tone balanced." The sonar screeched. A third echo appeared, overlapping the first two, a ghostly chorus in the dark. Somewhere beneath them, another torpedo hissed. This one struck the decoy frequency just as the first did before, but the resonance fed back through the hull. A dull thump shivered through Vigilant, knocking a wrench from Ellie's hand. She caught her breath. "It's learning." Penrose frowned. "What?" "They're torpedoes. They're adjusting to the noise pattern." She stared at the readout. "They're not blind anymore." The next seconds stretched thin as wire. On the sonar screen, 2 dots, one real, one false, merged. The machine's tone warbled, faltered, then steadied again. The torpedo passed harmlessly into the deep. When the silence finally came, it was thicker than fear. The captain ordered all stop. The convoy drifted on. Penrose sank onto a crate, sweat streaking the grime on his face. "We're alive." Ellie slumped beside him, fingers trembling. "Barely. You nearly cooked half the circuits." He gave a hollow laugh. "That's all right, so long as the fish believe us." She didn't laugh back. "This isn't a victory. It's a warning." He looked at her, surprised by the steel in her tone. "Meaning, they'll build better ears," she said softly, "and we'll have to tell better lies." Above them, the morning light began to bleed through the fog. The sea looked peaceful again, as if it hadn't just decided who should live and who should vanish. The men went about their work in uneasy quiet, glancing at the machine that had saved them. One sailor crossed himself every time he passed it. Another whispered, "The ghost saved us," like a prayer he didn't believe. That evening, Vigilant anchored at a temporary base in Iceland. The air smelled of diesel and cold iron. The ship's log recorded the incident as enemy contact evaded by evasive maneuvers. No mention of the device. No credit for the men who risked trial to test it. In the wardroom, Admiral Lockwood's voice crackled through the radio, clipped and formal. "Effective immediately, the experimental apparatus is to be decommissioned. Its operation was unauthorized. You are to make no record of its existence." Penrose listened in silence. The captain watched him warily. "You knew they'd bury it," he said. "I did." Ellie set down her cup. "Then why risk everything?" Penrose stared out the small window at the endless gray sea. "Because someday, someone will dig it up again. And maybe by then, We'll have learned how to use it without losing our souls. She wanted to argue, but she saw the exhaustion in his face, the quiet grief of a man who had outsmarted death but not bureaucracy. The ship creaked around them, wood and steel settling into uneasy rest. Outside, gulls screamed in the wind, white against the darkening sky. When the radio went dead, the silence felt heavier than any reprimand. Ellie looked down at the floor, at the faint outline of salt crystals where seawater had dried. "Do you ever think," she whispered, "that the sea isn't trying to kill us, that it's just tired of being lied to?" Penrose didn't answer. He tightened the strap on his bag, the weight of the device still inside. "We'll find another ship," he said finally. "Another test." As he walked out into the freezing dawn, Ellie followed, breath clouding in the pale light. Behind them, the sea rolled endlessly, calm, patient, waiting, and somewhere beneath it, far beyond sonar range, another signal pulsed in reply. A faint echo, rhythmic, familiar. The sound of something that had begun to listen back. Spring, 1944. The war had shifted, but the ocean hadn't. The same steel-gray waves rolled over secrets no one would ever retrieve, and the same cold wind carried the same metallic taste of fear. The Allies were preparing for an invasion that could turn the tide of the world. Yet deep beneath the surface, another war, smaller, quieter, but just as decisive, raged between men who never saw their enemies' faces. Arthur Penrose stood once more in a windowless bunker outside Liverpool, staring at the latest report pinned to the board. For ships lost in 10 days. Each torpedo had curved toward the sound of a decoy, but instead of being fooled, it had hunted smarter, homing on the frequencies his machine created. The Ghost had been compromised. "Admiral Lockwood says the Germans have developed acoustic seekers," said Ellie Grant, entering with a folder pressed to her chest. "They've learned from us." Penrose didn't look up. "We taught them too well." She placed the file on the desk. Inside were sketches recovered from a downed U-boat, primitive diagrams, yet unmistakable. "Kruger again," she murmured. "He's adapting faster than anyone." "Of course he is." Penrose lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke that drifted through the dim light. "When one side learns to lie, the other learns to listen." Ellie sat across from him, exhausted but composed. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "They're calling them smart torpedoes. They track by ear now. Every false echo we send only gives them another pattern to decode." Penrose nodded slowly. "And the Admiralty still wants to bury the project? They'd rather silence the problem than admit it exists." He turned to face her, eyes hollow yet burning. "Then we'll fight in the shadows. We started this war of sound. We'll finish it." For months, the Ghost evolved in secret. Hidden labs along the Scottish coast hummed with experiments never entered into records. Ellie designed new algorithms, twisting sound into chaos, while Penrose obsessed over unpredictability. No rhythm, no logic, only noise that even the ocean couldn't understand. They called it Ghost 2. It was uglier, louder, and twice as dangerous. In the flicker of low lamps, they worked like exiles soldering cables, mapping frequencies, living on black coffee and ration bread. Outside, the wind carried news of Normandy's impending invasion. Inside, their war was measured in decibels, not bullets. Sometimes, in rare quiet moments, Penrose caught Ellie staring out toward the sea through the narrow concrete slit that passed for a window. "You ever wonder," she said once, "if we're making something we'll never be able to stop?" He smiled faintly. "Every invention worth building starts that way." By May, their field test approached. The convoy route was a dangerous one. The Arctic run to Murmansk, the coldest, deadliest corridor of the war. The Vigilant, repaired and refitted, would lead the fleet again, this time with Ghost 2 wired into her bones. When they boarded, even the air felt different. Heavier, colder, aware of itself. The sailors recognized Penrose now, whispered his name with wary respect. The man who tricks torpedoes, they called him. He hated the title. It sounded too much like the man who tempts death. As the convoy departed, sheets of ice drifted between the ships, cracking under the bows. The wind howled like artillery, and snow fell sideways, blurring the horizon. The sonar room glowed dim blue, the machine humming beneath their boots. Signal interference detected. The operator called out an hour into the second night. Not ours, foreign pattern. Could be German triangulation. Penrose leaned over the display. They're testing us. Ellie adjusted the frequency dial. Then let's give them something to chase. She flipped the control. The room vibrated with an unholy resonance, a sound like the ocean groaning through its own teeth. On the sonar, multiple echoes bloomed, false ships scattering like a school of bait fish. Minutes later, a torpedo launched from somewhere below. The sound sliced through the water, hungry and sure. The crew froze, waiting for the impact. It never came. The torpedo swerved, then doubled back, confused by the noise. Cheers erupted, short-lived but fierce. Ellie exhaled, shaking. It worked. Penrose didn't smile. For now. An hour later, a second torpedo came, then a third. The first missed. The second hit one of the merchant ships, shattering it into flaming splinters. Men screamed in the dark, their voices carried by the wind like ghosts pleading for rescue. Penrose slammed his fist against the console. They've synchronized the seekers. They're using our echoes against us. Ellie grabbed his arm. We have to change the pattern, randomize it. He hesitated. You'll overload the capacitors. Then we burn them. Sparks flew as she tore open the casing, twisting dials until the machine shrieked. The hull vibrated, the deck trembling underfoot. The air filled with the roar of noise. No longer sound, but chaos, a symphony of madness. The next torpedo struck the ocean and detonated harmlessly, fooled by the storm they'd unleashed. But the feedback ripped through the device, circuits melting in an instant. Smoke poured from the vents. The lights flickered out. When silence finally fell, it felt wrong, like a void waiting to be filled. The Vigilant limped onward, engines stuttering, men coughing in the smoke. Ellie slumped against the bulkhead, her face streaked with soot. We did it, she whispered. Penrose looked down at the ruined machine. No, we survived. That night, he sat alone on deck, staring at the black horizon. Snowflakes fell into his cup of coffee and vanished instantly. He thought of his brother, of the telegram, of the first test when they had believed sound could be a savior. Now he wasn't sure if it was salvation or infection. Ellie joined him quietly, wrapped in a blanket. They'll never let us rebuild it, she said. They won't have to, he murmured. Kruger already has. She frowned. How do you know? He gestured to the sea. Because we taught him the melody. Now he's composing his own. Below them, in the icy depths, Kruger's U-boat prowled like a wolf in fog. His crew worked by lantern light, faces pale from weeks underwater. He held a small metal box, a crude mimic of the ghost, and smiled grimly. If they wish to haunt us, he told his men, then we'll teach the dead to scream. Over the following weeks, Allied losses spiked again. Ships vanished without distress calls. Sonar officers reported hearing their own echoes seconds before destruction, like the sea itself mocking them. The Admiralty denied it all. Officially, there was no sound war. Unofficially, Penrose and Ellie became ghosts too. They moved between bases under false orders, working in the margins. She grew thinner, quieter, her laughter rarer. He grew restless, his hands shaking when idle. Every night, he replayed the sounds in his head, pings, feedback, and the haunting echo of human screams. In August, word came that Kruger's U-boat had sunk 3 destroyers in a single attack, vanishing afterward. The last transmission intercepted from him was strange, an English voice repeating on loop, "We hear you." Ellie stared at the decoded message, her face pale. He's taunting us. Penrose's voice was hollow. No, he's talking to me. For weeks, he obsessed over the signal, convinced Kruger had found a way to turn the ghost into a weapon, one that sent false frequencies into Allied sonar, making ships chase illusions until they sailed straight into ambushes. They met Lockwood in secret at a naval station outside London. The admiral looked older, thinner, the war eating him too. This project dies tonight, he said firmly. Destroy every record. I'll see to it personally. Penrose leaned forward. If we kill the ghost, we blind ourselves. Lockwood shook his head. No, Commander. You made something no man should command. The ocean's already full of the dead. Don't give it a voice. Ellie looked at Penrose, her eyes full of quiet pleading. Maybe he's right. But Penrose stood calm and certain. The sea doesn't forgive weakness. If we silence ourselves, it'll listen to someone else. He left that night without orders, without permission, taking the last prototype with him. By dawn, Vigilant was gone from port. Ellie awoke to the news with a chill that went deeper than fear. Somewhere in the North Sea, the final hunt had begun. A storm rolled in from the west, blotting out the stars. The wind screamed across the waves, and the sonar crackled with phantom echoes, some theirs, some not. Ellie, forced aboard by duty and dread, sat in the dim radio room, headphones pressed to her ears. "Arthur," she whispered, "please tell me you know what you're doing." His voice came through the static low, steady, almost tender. "I'm teaching the sea one last lie." Through the hull, she could feel the faint pulse of the ghost. Alive again, but different now, deeper, almost human. On the radar, another echo appeared, matching their course exactly. The operator looked up, eyes wide. "Sir, that's impossible. There's another Vigilant out there." Ellie froze, heart hammering. Penrose smiled faintly. "No," he said. "That's the reflection. The sea's final lesson." The signal grew stronger. Two ships, one real, one imagined, moving side by side toward the heart of the storm. In the deep, Kruger listened too, hearing his own sonar feed return the same sound he'd sent. His second-in-command looked at him, terrified. "Her Captain, it's us. It's our own echo." Kruger didn't blink. This time we met our mirror. The torpedo fired. The ocean roared. Somewhere in that endless dark, two lies collided, and for a moment, the sea fell completely silent. When a storm cleared at dawn, no wreckage floated, no body surfaced. Only a faint hum drifted beneath the waves, steady, rhythmic, familiar. Back on land, days later, Ellie stood by the shore, wind whipping her hair, the gulls crying above. In her hand, she held a small recorder, the last thing Penrose had sent before sailing. She pressed play. A single voice, distorted by distance and static, whispered, "If the sea starts to answer, don't listen." She closed her eyes. The tide rolled in, the horizon empty, endless. And far below, in the deep where light never reached, something continued to hum, learning how to speak. Spring, 1945. The war was ending, though no one at sea could feel it yet. The radio spoke of victory and parades that hadn't happened, of flags waiting to be raised, but on the cold northern waters, the sound of death still traveled faster than hope. The North Sea stretched endless and gray, scarred by years of fire and silence. Somewhere beneath, the ocean remembered everything it had swallowed. Ellie Grant stood on the deck of the Vigilant, her face pale against the dawn. The wind whipped at her hair, tasting of salt and ash. She hadn't wanted to return to the ship. Every corridor still whispered Penrose's voice, but orders had left her no choice. The Admiralty needed her to finish what he had started, to test one final configuration of the Ghost. The war, they said, had no patience for mourning. The new Ghost prototype sat secured below deck, compact and quiet. Its sound signature had been altered again, more unpredictable, more dangerous. Officially, the device was being retired after this mission. Unofficially, it was bait. Somewhere in the deep, Captain Wilhelm Kruger's last U-boat still prowled, desperate, wounded, and vengeful. Allied command wanted him drawn out. Silenced before peace could expose the shadow war that had raged beneath the waves. Ellie hated the assignment. The sea no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a graveyard. She carried Penrose's notebook in her coat pocket, the pages stained with grease and coffee, filled with numbers that only he could fully understand. Sometimes she imagined him still down there, his voice rising with the hum of the current. By midday, the Vigilant reached the operation zone, a stretch of empty gray water marked only by drifting ice. The crew moved in silence. Everyone knew this was a hunt, but for whom, no one could quite say. Signal interference, the sonar operator muttered. Bearing west. Could be natural. Ellie leaned over his shoulder. It's not natural. Pattern's too steady. The captain, a quiet man named Hale, gave her a wary glance. You're certain? She nodded. Kruger's listening. He hesitated, then gave the order. Deploy the Ghost. Below deck, the machine came alive. Its tone was softer now, not the mechanical hum of its predecessors, but something almost organic, a whisper folded inside a heartbeat. The air vibrated as if the entire ship had begun to breathe. On the sonar, a faint echo appeared. Then another. He's responding, Ellie said. Far below, Kruger's U-boat glided through the dark like a shark that had forgotten hunger but remembered anger. His men were hollow-eyed, their uniforms stiff with salt. The captain sat at his console, listening to the phantom rhythm that pulsed through the water. He knew that sound. It was Penrose's legacy, the British trick that had haunted his dreams. But this tone was different, deeper, almost pleading. He smiled bitterly. So, the Ghost calls again. Above, the Vigilant maintained course. The tension was physical, stretching through every pipe and beam. Ellie's hands trembled as she adjusted the dial. The readings flickered wildly. Kruger was closing fast. He's testing us, she murmured. He's not firing yet. He's waiting to see if we flinch. Captain Hale's voice was low. Then we won't. Minutes passed. Each tick of the clock was a heartbeat. Then silence. The sonar blanked. Lost contact, the operator said. Ellie froze. No, he's beneath us. The torpedo struck before anyone could speak. The explosion ripped through the lower deck, throwing men against steel. Lights shattered. Steam roared from ruptured pipes. The ship lurched sideways, water flooding through the breach. Ellie stumbled, catching herself against a railing. Shut down the engine room. Seal compartments 4 through 6. Hale barked orders, his voice drowned by alarms. Smoke filled the corridor. Somewhere below, men screamed. The Vigilant groaned like a wounded animal, its metal skin twisting. In the chaos, Ellie ran for the control chamber. Flames licked at the walls. The Ghost still hummed, alive, its signal now erratic and wild. She grabbed a wrench and smashed open the panel, sparks flying. You're not dying like this, she whispered. Not to him. She rerouted the power manually, hot metal burning her palms. The machine screamed, a burst of pure frequency that tore through the water like lightning. The entire ship shook. Below, Kruger's sonar erupted in static. His men covered their ears, shouting in panic. The echo they'd been tracking multiplied. 10, then 20, then 50 identical ships surrounding them on every side. It's impossible, his first officer cried. They're everywhere. Kruger stared at the madness on his screen. No, he said quietly. Just one. She's learned to speak. He knew what was coming, but pride outweighed reason. Fire everything, he shouted. Torpedoes launched, slicing through the cold. But each one lost its way, chasing phantom sounds through infinite depths. The echoes twisted back upon themselves, feeding into the storm of deception Ellie had unleashed. On the Vigilant, systems overloaded. The crew scrambled for control as the ship buckled under the pressure. Ellie collapsed beside the console, coughing through the smoke. Hold together, she murmured, as if the ship could hear her. Just hold a little longer. Captain Hale staggered into the chamber. We need to abandon ship. No, Ellie said hoarsely. If we stop now, he escapes. Miss Grant, that's an order. She shook her head, eyes blazing. Arthur didn't die for orders. For a moment, Hale saw something in her expression, a reflection of Penrose himself, the same defiant calm of someone who'd already accepted the cost. He hesitated. Then finish it. Ellie turned the final dial. The machine wailed, a sound that no living creature should have made. It reverberated through the hull, into the deep, into the bones of the sea itself. Kruger's crew shouted as their gauges exploded, lights flickering out one by one. The submarine pitched downward. Pressure crushed steel, bending it inward like soft clay. Kruger held onto his console, staring into the dark. You win, Penrose, he whispered, before the ocean folded him into silence. On the surface, the blast from below rose like a fist through the water, throwing the vigilant onto its side. Ellie clung to the railing as the deck tilted. The sound was deafening, yet strangely beautiful, a single note that felt like both destruction and release. Then the noise stopped. The world became still. The ship floated broken but afloat. Smoke curled into the gray sky. Around them, the sea lay calm, as if nothing had happened. Ellie crawled to the shattered console. The ghost was dead, its circuits burned to ash. She pulled Penrose's notebook from her pocket, pages torn and damp. On the last page, his handwriting blurred but legible, she found a single line. If sound is memory, then silence is forgiveness. Her throat tightened. For the first time in years, she felt something like peace. She looked out over the water, where the waves glimmered faintly in the weak sunlight. The ocean no longer seemed cruel. It seemed tired, like a creature finally granted rest. The rescue ship arrived hours later, finding only wreckage and smoke. The crew was saved. Ellie refused treatment, sitting silently on the deck, wrapped in a blanket. When a medic asked what had happened, she only said, "The sea stopped listening." Weeks passed. Germany surrendered. Bells rang across cities that had forgotten how to sing. But in the naval archives, the ghost remained classified, its blueprints sealed, its name erased. Ellie returned to the coast alone. She rented a small cottage near the cliffs, where gulls cried and the waves whispered against stone. Every night, she stood by the water, listening, not for voices but for quiet. Sometimes, when the wind was right, she thought she could still hear it, a faint hum beneath the tide, low and constant, like a heartbeat refusing to die. Not menacing, simply waiting. One evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon, she took Penrose's notebook and tossed it into the sea. It floated for a moment, then slipped beneath the surface without a sound. "Rest now," she whispered. "You've earned it." The tide rose around her boots. The air smelled of iron and salt and spring rain. She closed her eyes. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, soft, hollow, and strangely familiar. The sea was speaking again, but this time it wasn't asking for war. It was remembering.